Jack Etkin is an independent media producer in Victoria, BC, on Lkwungen territories, unceded territories. For several years, he co-hosted the Solutions radio program alongside Rick Habgood on Cfuv, a community university radio station. And about 12 years ago, he got involved with Shaw's community channel, first on a show called Face to Face, and for the past 5 years on a show called Citizens Forum. Thank you for being here today, Jack.
Thank you very much, Janine.
Absolutely. So I did mention to you that I usually start by asking my guests how they found the vegan path and how that's inspired them to do the work that they're doing. I know you've been a wonderful activist for justice and peace and environment for a very long time, but I don't think you're vegan and yet. So I'll just start by asking you, why aren't you vegan, Jack?
I think it's more due to laziness and inefficiency than anything else.
That's very
I
honest.
think veganism is great, and sometimes I wish I could do it, but at other times I don't. So that's all I.
That is one of the most honest answers I've ever heard. So we can perhaps discuss that more later. And I could recommend a video called Earthlings that is very inspiring for people to
Yeah,
investigate.
I need some stuff like that. You need to be kicked in the pants sometimes to go where you want to go. And, we're going to be talking about media. And it's funny, the word veganism is probably never, ever, ever mentioned in the media, except when they use it to attack some activists who are trying to, do something.
It's true, right? Yeah, there's a lot that we can talk about there, but we'll save that for another show. And because for today, I want you to tell your story about how you managed to get a show on Shaw and what you accomplished there. And for listeners, if you're interested in exploring the vegan subject further, please check out other videos that I've done, interviews on Plant Powered Radio channel and podcasts, and I'll also add some links into the show chat here for people who are interested. So, but Jack, where were you? Do you remember the moment when you thought, I'm going to get involved with community media somehow?
Well, not exactly the moment, but I remember the circumstances. And you mentioned, like, we're here in Victoria, and it's most people think of it as Shaw Community Television, Shaw being a large media corporation that is certainly not the friend, I don't think, of community television. The way it works is the CRTC, which is, I don't even know what that means anymore, but the CRTC is the government regulating body. And years ago, they set up some wonderful regulations about community television. And I was sent a list of those regulations by a guy called Sid Tan in Vancouver. Do you know Sid at all?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So he sent me this. I can't even remember why. So I had a friend, David White. Do you remember David?
I do.
Anyways,
Vaguely, yes, David and Joan, right?
yeah.
Yeah, right.
So David filmed a speaker at UVic talking about missile defense. This was, geez, must have been almost 15 years, 13 or 14 years ago. So he filmed this speaker, and I phoned up Shaw. And because I thought, having read the regulations that Sid Tan gave me, I thought this would be perfect for community television. So I phoned up Shaw, and I can still remember this. The guy just laughed at me, and he said, "Oh, we don't do that." I remember. I think I remember his exact word. We don't do that.
And what was the video about?
It was about missile defense.
So,
Canada getting involved in the U.S. Missile defense or something like that.
okay,
NATO and all of that stuff. It
okay.
was just a speaker, a woman speaking at the university at UVic. So I phoned up Sean. The guy said, "We don't do that." And I said, "Well, somebody sent me the regulations." And so I said, "I'll phone you back." I went and I got the paper that Sid sent me, and I phoned back the guy at Shaw, and I said, "This is what it says." And he said, "Okay." So he knew exactly what was in those regulations. But when
Mhm.
I, as a citizen, phoned up Shaw and said, "We want to show this," the response was, "No, you can't. We don't do that." Hoping that I would go away. And it was only because I had the regulations that Sid had sent me that he had to agree to it. So, everybody I've worked with at Shaw has been great. The people are great, including even some people who came from head office in Calgary for different meetings, although we had some good fights. So the people are good, but the corporation, should not be in any way involved with community television. The way it works is the regulations are great, but everything has been corrupted. So uh, there has to be somebody has to get the license to operate the community TV station here in Victoria and really across Canada. So nobody knows about it. So Shaw says, we'll do it. And then the government gives them the money to operate the community TV station. And they always pretend it's theirs.
Wait a
But it's
minute. So you're saying that anybody could form a media company and go to the government and say, we want this to be a community or TV station in our.
Yeah, and there's actually a group called Cactus operating out of somewhere in Ontario that can assist with that kind of stuff.
Cool.
But I never had the ability to fight that fight, and so we just did what we wanted to do, and it was
So
okay.
you managed to get a channel on, or a show on a channel on Shaw, right?
Yeah, we got a show on the community television channel, which here is Channel 4. Now, interestingly, I think community television is great, and it could be the solution to so many of our problems. Because, I mean, one of the biggest problems we have is that the corporations control all the media, including CBC. But here we have this community station, right? And it's in every town and every city across Canada, or it used to be. The Trudeau government is now, I believe, in the process of shutting it down. I think community television is already gone from the major cities. Any city over 1 million, it's gone. It still exists in smaller towns and cities.
Okay, so when you say Trudeau government is shutting it down, are they changing the CRTC regulations? Or are they just stopping the funding for it?
Right. So it's interesting. The funding for community television has nothing to do with Shaw. The funding for community television comes from a small tax of 50 cents or $1 per month on everybody. I think this is how it works. I could be wrong, but I think this is how it works. So everybody who has cable TV pays a small fee to have a community TV station. That's where the money comes from. And that's the money that the government gives to Shaw to manage our community TV station here, right? The money has nothing to do with Shaw. So what the government is doing now is it's closing down community TV and giving the money to Shaw or Rogers or Bell, whoever, to run their own local news station, right? Because those stations are losing advertising revenue because of the internet. So they say, we don't have any money. So the government has said, okay, we'll shut down community television and give you that money,
Wow.
as well as other money that they're also giving them.
So as far as you know, the CRTC regulations still exist.
The CRTC regulations still, and they're great. I have a copy of them somewhere. I don't even know where, but I'm sure you could get them. Or if we phoned up the CRTC. But unfortunately, the CRTC, like every other government regulating body, is now run by the organizations it's supposed to regulate. So Shaw and Rogers and Bell, as far as I'm concerned, they run the CRTC now, just like the chemical companies run Health Canada.
Right, and the pharmaceutical companies.
And the
Okay,
logging companies,
so,
and the mining
right,
companies,
and big ag,
and
big
big
ag,
ag.
big
Yeah,
pharma.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I know you from radio at CFUV. In fact, you were one of the people that helped me get onto the radio, along with Rick Habgood. I thank you
one
for
of the
that.
best things we ever did, I'm
Oh,
sure.
for me, certainly,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
And plus, you did great work.
Thank you. For a long time, I had a great
Yeah.
experience there, and we'll get into maybe what happened with that a little bit later. But my understanding of the CRTC regulations is so it's the Canadian Regulatory, I don't even know what it stands
Canadian
for.
radio and
Television
television, something.
Communications or something?
That could be, yeah. I can't remember.
Okay. I mean, and as far as radio goes, it's what kind of forced Canadian music. You remember back in the 70s, we used to laugh at, oh, Canadian content or whatever. I don't know. That I remember that was sort of the general idea. Oh, Canadian music, what's that? Ha ha ha. It was a weird thing now that I
Yeah.
look back on it, but that was in rural Alberta. That was my experience. And then when I got to see FUV, I realized, oh, like if we didn't kind of force it, we would just be hearing top 40 music on every radio station everywhere, right? So CFUV and other radio stations like it across the country are a place where they can't play. They're regulated to not play top 40 music, and in fact, they have to have a certain percentage of Canadian content, and that has helped Canadian musicians tremendously, I would think, through these years.
And I think all radio had to have a certain amount of Canadian content. And I seem to remember the media back then mocked that idea, but it turned out, as you just said, to be great.
Right.
Otherwise, you get overwhelmed by the corporate stuff.
Right. And just while I think of it as well, I mean, in terms of media and just programming generally, we're so inundated with US stuff. I don't think we even realize how much as Canadians. I mean, you probably remember too when you were a kid and all you could get was the CBC and the CBC French, right, on television.
Actually, I remember when there was nothing. I,
Aha.
I remember before TV.
And then
I,
the and
yeah,
then the CBC, and
and
then
then
all
the
of a sudden there's
CBC.
all these US stations.
Yeah, yeah. Once we got cable, I guess, or even before then, there were some. But yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
It's really crazy. I mean, it touches on the deeper issues of what Canada is and who the corporations are and who runs our country and are we a democracy? And because we're never asked about any of these things, right? About how we want our television to be run.
right,
They just impose it on us,
right.
and that's the way it is. This country is not a democracy, and the fact, and in large part, it's because we don't have the free press that a democracy requires.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, did you kind of have that idea as you were heading into this new independent media world that Sid Tan had introduced you to, or what was kind of your motivation at that time?
I think my motivation was I wanted to be able to put stuff out that wasn't corporate, wasn't controlled by, the big players, just something different. That I think that's why I did it.
Okay. And how did you get to CFUV?
Rick, Rick Habgood, yeah, yeah. Rick said one day, let's start a radio show, and he did all the work. I mean, because he did all the technical stuff, right? I was bad on the technical end there then, which was like 15 years ago, and I'm worse on it now because it's gotten more complex and I've learned nothing. So Rick did all the work, dealt with CFUV, got us in, and for years we did a radio show.
Yeah, you
And it
guys
was fun.
were a pretty popular radio show. I can't remember what it was called. It was first one was called Solutions, though, you said.
Well, I think sometime, no, that wasn't the first name, but
Oh,
somewhere along the road, because we did it for a few years,
yeah.
somewhere along the road, I think we did call it Solutions, which was always the name that Rick wanted. Um, and because he was interested in solutions. And as I mentioned in that email to you, I think, it was funny. We had guests on who could talk about the problems all day long. You want to talk about climate change or GMOs or farm fish or why we don't have veganism or whatever. But when Rick would ask them, what are the solutions? I mean, people really had no answers, right? And that's a big part of our problem. We, aside from protesting and marching in the streets, or getting arrested like people are doing at Fairy Creek now, or we're doing, 1,000 people arrested. What are the solutions? Well, media is a solution. And the corporations know this very well. That's why they own all the big media. The rest of us have to figure this out, that media is important. And we don't have the free press that we think we have. One of the biggest lies when you listen to our local radio station, which I think is truly evil, talking about CFAX radio here, or the CBC or CTV when you're watching their news, or Global or the Globe and Mail. They always pretend, the biggest pretense is that they work for us. The journalists work for us. You watch the people reading the news on CBC or CTV, or you listen to this guy on CFAX, our local corporate radio station. I mean, he's just a true corporate journalist who's the host of their main show. Just it's ugly and twisted. But they always pretend they work for us, but they don't. They work for the corporation that pays them. It's all a lie, right? The whole thing is a lie.
Yeah, I mean, and it might seem conspiratorial or whatever, but just the idea that you or I or Rick or Chris Cook or anyone would if we were to try to get a job at the CBC, for example, right? They would
Yeah,
never
right.
hire. They would
No,
never
no,
hire
no,
us.
no, because we wouldn't say the right thing. I have a friend whose name I won't mention, but he's a soil scientist in a province on which we clear cut mountainsides and tell the public there's no erosion and no loss of soil productivity, right? And he could never work in the provincial government where he was so desperately needed because he wouldn't lie. He wouldn't go along with the story that everything's okay. And it's the same in media. I mean, if you get into media and you're not willing to play the corporate game, then your career is going to go absolutely nowhere.
Right.
It
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to tell the truth, or what you see is the truth, you're not allowed into the corporate media. It's
Right.
just, I can guarantee folks that 100%. And you mentioned something sounding conspiratorial. Yeah, I'm a proud conspiracy theorist. I mean, I have no doubt that the oil companies and the banks and the politicians and the loggers, the logging corporations and the chemical corporations and the corporations that are so big we don't even know their name, I'm sure they conspire against us. I have no doubt about that.
The loggers too.
The logging companies.
The companies, right? I
Yeah.
like to think the workers
Oh,
are
yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
feed their families, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, these people who sit in offices and decide how our lives are gonna work, like
And one of the big
publicize,
things
right?
about the media is to pit us against each other. We, the environmental community, are the ones who are taking away the jobs of the hardworking loggers, right? I mean, they tell that story. They've told it for decades.
All right.
And of course, the real story is we're all in this together. It's the
Right.
corporations that take away everybody's jobs, right? As soon
Yeah.
as they're not needed anymore.
Yeah, we have Occupy, I think, to thank, Occupy Wall Street movement to thank for us helping us identify the 1% versus the
Yeah,
99%, right? And I don't like to think it's us against them either, but it kind of is. Like it's
it is.
the working
These are
class
evil,
people.
evil people at the top. And
There's, yeah.
they are capable of things that people would not even believe. I just have come to believe them because luckily in my life, somewhere along the way, I got put onto this path of having the chance to see how they operate a little bit from the inside. And
Mm.
it was unbelievable. I mean, I couldn't believe it, but when you start to see it, even somebody as stupid as me, after a few years, you go, this isn't what I thought, right?
Some
It's all a lie.
Something's not right here. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the beauty of independent media. We're certainly not earning a great living doing this or anything like that, but it's an educational process, isn't it? It's an opportunity to provide a place where voices can be heard that aren't otherwise heard, and at the same time, we're hearing those voices and getting educated too, right? So, okay, so let's get back to Shaw. So somehow
Okay.
you managed to get a show on Shaw TV
And
after all.
remember, it's not Shaw, it's community television. I
Oh,
prefer to call it that. I
right.
don't want to give them the
Thank you.
credit. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think of it as Shaw TV.
Yeah.
No, it's community television that happens to run on through this particular radio or television
Yeah.
channel
Cable,
station.
because they own the cable company, we get put on a cable station. Right?
Right.
The community television station is Channel 4 here in Victoria.
Right.
It used to be 11 or 13, I think, in
Okay.
Vancouver, which is gone now. As I said, it's been shut down in the bigger cities because they don't want it.
Right.
Right? I don't mean Shaw, I mean Shaw and the government together.
So I'm still a little bit mystified. So let's say, because I think there's still a little potential there. If people said, "Oh my gosh, I want to investigate that," like, would you have to have all the camera equipment and all that stuff if you somebody wanted to?
No, the job of like when Shaw gets the license, they say, we want the license, and they get it. Then their job is to provide a studio and volunteer camera crews and everything. You, as somebody who wanted to do a show, or me as somebody who wanted to do a show, we just sort of walk in and do it, right? But
Okay.
their job as the licensee or the manager is to provide a working studio that somebody like you could walk in and do it.
If I had all the right paperwork, which we're going to discuss a little bit later.
The paperwork was fairly straightforward.
But now there's this new level of paperwork, you know
Oh,
what I'm
okay.
referring to, that we're going to talk about
All right.
all that in detail. But
Okay.
while we're on YouTube channel, we'll stick to the media stuff, and then at some point I'll say, okay, now we're going to switch over to a different channel on Odyssey, and I'll post the link for people who want to hear that other more nuanced discussion. So, but I still want to get your story. So you're at CFUV, and you left, and then Rick stayed on with his own show, Breaking News or Breaking Ice, I think it was called.
Yeah, right. Breaking ice because it's about climate change.
Climate change for a long time. Yeah, he
Yeah.
did that. Okay, and then you launched into this community television world.
Right.
And did they ever have any input into the kind of guests you could have, or say, no, you can't talk about that here, or that sort of thing?
That may have happened. Well, Shaw did one thing that I think is kind of unforgivable. And it's got nothing to do with the people who are working for Shaw. It's Shaw, the corporation. From the very beginning, when I first went there, and actually I went with Chris Cook, because that was one of the first shows we wanted to do. Just as this was beginning, was Chris was going to interview a bunch of guests, and he would be the host, and we would. So what Shaw told us was, you can only talk about the most local of issues. If you want to talk about education, for example, what you have to talk about is a local school here and what they're doing. You can't talk about broader issues, the environment or anything like that. But I'd read the regulations, right? So I knew that wasn't true. So I said, that's just not what it says here. And they had to relent, which was great. So we did exactly the show we wanted to do. And then I worked with another fellow who, I won't mention his name, but he was kind of a genius. He, in his basement next to the furnace, created a studio that was the equivalent of really what Shaw had. And we filmed a show in his basement for years. And he did all the editing. And, this was on a budget of zero, but he was great. So,
And so the kind of guests that you guys had then, can you name some of your favorite guests and what sort of things you talked about?
I was trying to remember. Well, two of them have been Walter Mcginnis and Norm Taylor. Um, they were both kind of co-hosts on the shows, and so we always did, as part of we filmed basically every 2 weeks and did a show every 2 weeks, and then it would repeat about 25 times over a 2 week period. So that's a lot when you're on a cable TV station. You repeat it 25 times. Right now, Extinction Rebellion, for example, has their own show on Channel 4 here, and it repeats over and over again. Our show is now finished. We're not doing community television anymore. But Walter and Norm were both co-hosts, and every 2 weeks we would do, let's say, a 18-minute long just conversation about whatever we wanted to talk about. So that was steady. Trying to remember all the guests. Mehdi Najari has been one of the guests that was on the most. Chris Cook was on quite a few times. We had Dermot Travis, who was on from an organization called Integrity BC. He was on a fair bit. My traditional Chinese medicine doctor was on a few times.
Cool.
I don't think we almost never had any politicians on, except for Elizabeth May. She was on a few times. Um, there was a guy, I can't remember his name. Oh, he did health research at UVic, and we talked a lot about how the drug companies operated. This was, over, going back 8 to 10 years over a period of time, and it wasn't pretty the way they operate. Just local people who were involved with environmental issues, social issues. We had Sharon Noble on quite a few times. She's very involved with the issue of 5G and electromagnetic radiation, all the dangers of wireless radiation. I mean, that was her big issue. And we actually had a lot of people on, scientists and doctors, talking about that issue. And it's funny because our governments, which pretend to care so much for our health, with wireless radiation and 5G, because there's corporate money to be made, it's just full speed ahead. It doesn't matter what the science says, you just go and do what you want. And Canada has approximately, I would say, the lowest and worst standards virtually in the world for what our population can be exposed to. They just let the corporations do what they want. And I remember Walter Mcginnis, who's the co-host on the show for quite a while, and actually he did a lot of interviews, and so did Norm. So when Walt was on and Norm, they would do a lot of the interviews. So I would do one, they would do one, and then we'd do a talk between the two of us. So the show was kind of like that as well. But I remember Walt one day took about 800 scientific studies in a big cardboard box down to our local public health officer, Richard Stanwyck. That's the local public health guy. And it was like, just like butting your head against a brick wall. They didn't want to see it. They were totally disinterested. And we had a lot of people on talking about GMO foods too. And Dimitri Lascaris recently, who unfortunately, in my opinion, didn't become the leader of the Green Party, but may in the not too distant future. I don't know if he's going to run again, but I hope he does. Yeah.
I remember Walt talking a lot about when the smart meters, we were trying to stop the smart meters
Yes.
happening too,
That was a big issue for him.
Right. Yeah. Kind of wonder
Good luck with that.
what happened with all these things that
it's funny. The government wants to put something in your house.
Right.
You can't say no.
No, you can't say no to put stuff in your body now too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so is the show online? Are there archives online?
We're on Odyssey, which
Okay.
I think is spelled Odyssey.
No, it's Odyssee.
Oh, okay. Odyssee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where we are there, I don't even know, but maybe you can find it and edit in the
Yeah, because
link.
Citizens Forum.
I'll try to. I've got it down somewhere. I'll try to find it.
Okay,
And
I'll
send
see.
it to you.
Okay, cool. All right. And my other question I thought of when you were speaking there is about feedback, like all these sort of topics that people weren't hearing about anywhere else. Did you have an opportunity to hear back from viewers?
We got very little feedback from viewers, but over the years, I'd be in the grocery store or something, and somebody would walk up to me and say, "Oh, I really like your show. I really like your show."
Oh,
And I got a fair bit of that. And the first few times it happened, I didn't know whether to shake their hands or run. I really didn't know what the response to, because we talked about a lot of controversial issues, and from a perspective that you never hear in the corporate media, and I didn't know how people would react. But it was all positive. Virtually every time it was positive. And people would say, I don't even agree with you, but I like the fact that I think you're at least being honest. Right? So it was very positive. Recently, well, it wasn't recently, maybe 9 or 10 months ago, I just happened to mention on the show that I had stopped buying produce from California because they used fracking wastewater to irrigate their crops, right? Because they were in a drought. And the oil companies don't want to have to deal with all this poisonous water they have, because it
Right.
costs money to dispose of it. So they give it to the farmers, including organics.
Wow.
It's legal on the organic crops as well, and they use it to irrigate the food that we eat. And nobody, I mean, is that ever mentioned anywhere?
Oh, I've never
Is it
heard it.
ever meant? No, it's
Mm.
never. So I got an email from somebody who was annoyed at me for saying that. He said, "That's ridiculous." It's comments like that that make people not believe anything you say. So I just sent him back a couple of the stories, that I Googled from California groups fighting this. And he said, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, I think I've noticed that personally too, through the years. If my first reaction is, oh, shut up, that's not true, then it's probably true. And my reaction is, I don't want this to be true. But when we have a deeper look at things, it turns out.
There is no level to which our rulers will not go. If somebody wants to Google the words Bush, Hitler, and Guardian, they will see the story in the British newspaper, The Guardian, about how the two Bush presidents, their father or grandfather, who was Prescott Bush, was the director of a bank that was owned by some of America's wealthiest families.
Mm.
And they used it to funnel money to the Nazis, Hitler and the Nazis, in the late 20s and early 30s to get them started.
Wow.
Right? Because, and that when I read that story, somebody I don't know how I ever came across it. I thought, yeah, that's never talked about. How did Hitler and this group of nobodies take over, one of the world's major nations? You can't do that without money. But the money is never talked about. But a lot of it came from abroad. I mean, when you're trying to do something, if you're a little enviro group, what's the most important thing, right? You got to have some money. And
Right.
it came from America and no doubt Canada as well.
The global elite, right? They
Global elites.
they run in their own circles for sure. So when you talk about corporations controlling the media, I think about advertising. I think advertising is incredibly powerful, and not just the direct advertising we get, but like the product placement inside storylines and the storylines themselves. I understand that the Bill Gates, for example, has some influence over storylines within like ER apparently, and other television shows. So big money is really controlling the narrative at levels that we don't even comprehend. But when you say corporations controlling the media, is that what you're referring to, or is there more there?
No, what I mean is that the corporations own all the big media. They are, the same corporations that are advertising are tied into the corporations that, like, for example, Bell Media. Bell Media is one of the biggest. There's only, I would say, fewer than a dozen corporations that own virtually every television station, radio station, daily newspaper, and community newspaper in the country. If you that one dozen companies, like there's a company called Quebecor, and they own virtually everything in Quebec. I mean, it's unbelievable. So Bell Media owns CTV. Um, the Thompson family, which owns the Globe and Mail, which is Canada's richest family, and they also own the Reuters news agency. I think, were tied into CTV as well. And I mean, these are the big players, right? So the guy who's the head of Bell Media, the chairman of the company that owns Bell Media, which is called BCE, the chairman of that company is the former CEO of the RBC, right, Royal Bank.
Oh.
So I mean, when you got the former CEO of the Royal Bank, who's the head of Canada's probably largest media organization, then so he controls, right? The chairman of the corporation is the guy, right? So he's put in place. And if you can you imagine a journalist who works for CTV, or they also own about, I think, 80 radio stations across the country, including CFAX here. can you imagine a journalist say, I'm going to do a story on how the banks aren't paying enough taxes?
Hmm.
You know,
No.
how far is your career going to be going? And
Right.
it's like that. It's totally like that. Every word is controlled. You can maybe make a mistake in your early years when you're starting out as a journalist, but if you don't get it very quickly, then you're not going to have a career in journalism in Canada. I mean, look what they did with climate change. I first heard about climate change over 30 years ago. And I know some people don't believe in climate change. That's fine. But I do believe that, human activity is totally destroying the planet and including the climate. And we have to cut back on. So, I mean, I heard about it first over 30 years ago. And when I did, I thought, holy smokes, this is huge. And then my eyes were open. And for 10 years, there was literally not a word in the media ever, ever, ever about climate change. And then it started. I can remember the Globe and Mail doing an editorial just lambasting Greenpeace for daring to suggest there was something like climate change because they're trying to destroy the Canadian economy. Like that was the Globe and Mail. Now the Globe and Mail is, oh yeah, climate change. We're going to lead the way.
Right. Right.
Bullshit. It's just like the media knew about the residential schools in Canada from day one.
Sure.
And they kept it quiet basically for a century so the residential schools could do what the residential schools were designed to do. And now the media is, we are standing with the First Nations. And nobody ever calls them out on it, right? I've never heard anybody ever call them out for their, not only hypocrisy, but mass murder. They are the ones who allowed the residential schools to operate. And
Well, they're part of it.
these people should be in prison. Yeah, part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Silence is complicity, as they say, and yeah. So, and like anything, is follow the money, right? And we're not going to see any grassroots activists at any high levels in the media. And as you say, if we try to be journalists, we're just not going to. We're not going to be there for very long, or we're going to change and become someone different. There's a great show on, I do enjoy entertainment, and I watch it with a mindful eye. And there's this black comedy on HBO, I think it's HBO or Crave, and it's called Succession. And it's written by a British, and I have great respect for the British sort of subtle, dark humor. And it's about a media mogul family and the intricacies of what goes on interpersonally with them, and then how the empire maintains control. And so on the one hand, it's sort of glorifying this family and all their wealth and the life, they get into a helicopter and they're transported and they're picked up by a car and they're taken to but on the other hand, they have these crazy storylines of stuff that goes on in their personal lives. And it's really a great series. I recommend it.
I've heard of it.
Oh, I'm waiting for the next round. Okay, so let's shift gears then and delve into that which cannot be spoken of on YouTube because they're owned by somebody who doesn't like us to have freedom of the press. So for people listening, I will post a link in the notes if you want to carry on. We're going to talk about the Wu flu situation and the media control of the narrative on that at a different on a different platform. Thanks for listening to this so far.